This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
I was really sluggish trying to prep for the show in the last day or so. Part of it was the strenuous task of getting me to even sit down to watch Dynamite. I almost fell asleep twice before even hitting the replay function. I was so tired. But even the retro shows this week didn't have a whole lot of noteworthy material. I mean, we'll talk about all the retro content in a while, but the NWA studio shows only having 30 minutes of runtime makes it really hard to find a whole lot to talk about. You know, everything is already promo, squash match, lather, rinse, repeat. But, you know, even the half-hour editions don't really have any major angles or blowaway segments on them. Granted, they're still a lot better than Dynamite in most cases, but I mean, what's that really saying? And we'll get to Dynamite. Boy, howdy, will we ever get to Dynamite. That show is just... Ugh. But before we do so, make sure that if you're watching the FSWR channel for the first time, that you subscribe, comment, like the show. Make sure whether you're checking us out on YouTube or Rumble every Monday and Friday for new material, stop back each time. Today is the Dynamite and Retro Review Series rundown. Monday's shows are the WWF Raw and WWE SmackDown reports. Also weekend pay-per-view specials if there's anything going on. Or in the case of WWE, premium live events. I'm hoping that goes away with Vince being out of the equation, but doesn't look like it. Again, I've talked about this before, but the Friday shows will probably end up getting uploaded a little bit later in the afternoon, probably evening. I've had some modifications in my work schedule as of late. Trying to balance 3 jobs is hard, so sue me. But I do appreciate all the support that we get on the channel, whether you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. Thank you for sticking around, and I truly mean that. You know, hopefully you come back and listen to the shows every chance you get. It's one of those deals where it's audio only, so if you're like me and you really only get a chance to listen to podcasts while you're trying to multitask doing 10,000 other things, do so with this channel. But, why don't we go ahead and get started with Dynamite first, since we all just love this show and can't wait every week to just talk about how great AEW is and all its splendor. So, I've had to watch the show on delay for quite a while now. Usually catch it on replay off my DVR on Thursdays. However, with the schedule changes I've been going through recently, I've had to put it off even later than that. And I was really putting off watching this show. I don't even know why. I just had this overwhelming sense of pending doom with AEW this week, even before I hit the replay function on the DVR. And I've already kind of touched on my overall feeling with AEW right now. The one thing I used to credit the show for better or worse, even if I hated the majority of the crap they were putting out on the program every week, the shows were never boring. You know, the one thing about AEW's booking is nonsensical and spontaneous as stuff happens from week to week. Dynamite was never boring. There was always something to talk about after the show was over, be it good or the drizzling shite. And ever since the post-all-out stuff, now that the CM Punk Elite drama has kind of subsided, Dynamite has been a lifeless 2-hour program. There's nothing that's sticking out to me on this show right now. And maybe that's because of the guys that are getting spotlighted and pushed right now, most of them being guys that I virtually have no interest in seeing. I don't really know what the issue is, but there's more stuff that I'm skipping over now or not actively finding myself engaged in. And not for the lack of effort on my part, because there are certain guys on the show that in an ideal world, if the booking and consistency on the show wasn't so rotten, I'd probably be engaged with more than 25% of the overall roster from week to week. Like, take the way they open the show, for example. They start with the official TV debut of Renee Paquette, better known as Renee Young from WWE. Of course, that's Moxley's wife, for those that don't know. And she'd been rumored to have signed with AEW for a while, so this wasn't all that shocking of a debut. I always liked Renee in WWE. Didn't have anything against her personally. She was probably one of their better backstage interviewers they've had in the last 10 or so years. Not that her competition level was all that high when she was surrounded by a bunch of other generic hot blonde interviewers with no personality. At least Renee had personality. But it's like, okay, they bring her out. She's there. Apparently they signed her just to make her another interviewer, because AEW figured they already didn't have enough of those hanging around. So we need another goddamn interviewer alongside whoever their main crew of interview people are. I mean, at this point, I don't even know. I mean, they rotate commentators and interviewers so often at this point, I can't keep track of who the main ones are. At one point, I thought it was Tony Schiavone, but who even knows anymore? But, I mean, I always revert back to this question, but I'm going to continue to ask it until I get answers. Why am I supposed to be excited about this? It's cool they have Renee, but I don't know. I get the sense that I'm supposed to be more enthralled by this than what I'm currently feeling at the moment. And then comes the other issue, because as her first guest to interview here in Toronto, Canada, she then cheerfully welcomes out Christian Cage, who last I checked on the show was supposed to be a heel. So Renee's first interview on this program, and they're immediately throwing one of their top heels on the roster at her to try and have her go back and forth with. And as much as I am a fan of Christian personally, always have been, we immediately run into the other problem here. And that's the problem of realizing that this will end up revolving around him, Jungle Boy, and Lucchesores in some fashion. A program that I have long since soured on and have absolutely no interest in anymore, because they fucked it up 6 ways from Sunday before they even shot the angle at the pay-per-view where Christian beat Jungle Boy in like 20 seconds. And of course, getting back on the subject of Renee for a second, she's such an afterthought in this whole thing. All she does is ask Christian another generic WWE scripted question. Christian does a brief heat promo on the Toronto hockey team, because cheap heat is apparently the only thing AEW heels are good at. And they immediately segue right into the Jungle Boy Lucchesores match. And Renee completely disappears. Never taking the time to put her over, explain why she signed with AEW, how she's happy to be there, specifically going out of their way to spotlight her and her only. Nope. She's just there, and then she's gone. And then we had the Jungle Boy Lucchesores match. By the way, Jungle Boy is also still apparently so mad at Christian that he not only let him come out to do a heat promo on the ramp prior to the Dinosaur's entrance, but he then also let the Dinosaur come down for his entrance too. After all those weeks of jump attacks, here was his perfect opportunity to go right after them. No jump attack. No going right after the heels for all the horrible shit they put him through in the last month plus. He just decided this week to let the heels like the smell of their own farts for some reason. Oh, and by the way, he is now Jack Perry. Jungle Boy Jack Perry. But they are now officially recognizing it. Only took him 3 years of JR calling him Jack Perry every week on TV for them to catch on to that. Anyway, they announced this match on the last show, so I had a week to prepare for whatever indie-rific horse trite they were going to try and pull off here. Took them approximately 3 minutes before Lucchesores broke out the table and set it up ringside. Of course, the fans all immediately start chanting, "We want tables," because they're all a bunch of ECW marks. I don't even think I need to mention the obvious, too. How the dinosaurs set up the table ringside, but then both guys immediately walked away from it and started doing more spots, making it apparent that the table bump was evident only to happen later on in the match. Because you got to tease it first, right? Because that's how this stuff works. I mean, there was some okay stuff in this match. Like, Jungle Boy took some alright bumps when Luchasaurus was tossing him around on the floor. If you can get over the fact that they were brawling on the floor for about 8 hours while the bald referee just stood there playing with himself. They came back from break and did some more table spot teases, until finally at one point, Jungle Boy gave Luchasaurus a sunset powerbomb off the apron through said table, in plain view of the referee, by the way, and of course the veteran Christian throwing out the obvious question, or the obvious statement, I should say, that should have been a disqualification. No shit, Sherlock. I guess Christian hasn't been paying that close attention to the TV program, though, where this happens in every goddamn match. And it never leads to a disqualification because nobody agents these fucking matches. So after the table spot, I fast-forwarded through the rest of this thing because my tolerance for stupidity this week was not that lenient. I have no idea what happened at the end. Luchasaurus' music was playing, so I presume he won. And I presume Christian interfered on his behalf because that is how every match in AEW goes when a heel wins. Copious amounts of outside interference, referees always looking like retards, and people will still defend it to the nth degree. Did I miss anything there? No? Good. We're going to move on. After this, they went to the back for another Renee interview with Ethan Page and Stokely Hathaway, and this time, she didn't even get a word in edgewise before Matt Hardy and Private Party interrupted and everyone started jaw-jacking. So after 2 on-screen appearances, Renee is already a complete nothing burger on this show. Way to go, Tony. Another all-time classic signing right there. Then, because apparently they had a mission this week to run off viewers as quickly as humanly possible, someone decided it would be a smart idea to give QT Marshall a live microphone. And that was all mostly to set up a Samoa Joe Wardlow squash, because some mark in the back, probably Tony, woke up one day and said, "You know what sounds great together? Samoa Joe and Wardlow. And we can call him War Joe." That is probably the extent of all the thought that went into pairing Joe and Wardlow together for no reason at all. When it's totally counterproductive to Wardlow's booking, and we've been given absolutely no rhyme or reason for why Joe and Wardlow are a team now. Just one day Tony Khan said, "I'm going to book Joe and Wardlow in a tag team." And I guess we're all supposed to swallow that. How about fuck off? That's my response. We had Swerve Strickland taking on Daddy Ass, better known as Billy Gunn. The man that is still in better shape than about 90% of AEW's roster, and I guarantee you not a shred of it is fat. I mean, this is by far one of the better things on the entire show. And the amazing thing is they didn't even need to do a whole lot to hook the crowd. Billy Gunn's still the fucking man. A little slow moving in the ring, obviously, but like I said, most men would kill to have the body that guy has at his age, much less people my fucking age. I mean, I know 20-something-year-old schlubs that are nowhere near the condition Billy's in. Hit the gym, folks. It is not that hard. And they had a grassroots babyface heel match where the people actually stayed with it for the whole match. Billy was a great house of fire early on. Swerve did a nice heat spot where he cut off Billy at the knee and worked that over. I'll say this about Swerve. I was never totally sold on him in NXT, but that guy's got some really solid facial expressions, especially as a heel. Like those smug looks he was giving the camera when he was on offense, that stuff looked really convincing. Like he's got one of those punchable douchebag faces. Like in a good way too. Like the kind of face where you're like, God, I hope someone slapped the taste right out of that guy's mouth. And of course, Billy made a small little comeback at the end, kicked out of a double foot stomp from the top rope that Swerve tried to give him. And Swerve actually sold it great. And they went with the classic heat finish of Swerve rolling up Billy near the ropes and grabbing a hold of the bottom rope right as soon as the ref's hand came down for the 3. A heel cheating to win through nefarious means, and it doesn't involve multiple outside interference angles and or run-ins galore. What a novel concept. So at that point, I finally found something enjoyable on this show, and I was not about to let anything or anyone ruin that moment. So at the point Tony Nese and Mark Sterling came out to try and do their spiel, I immediately said, nope. And I moved right along with the program. Much like Dan Lambert had go-away heat with me, Mark Sterling now has go-away, get the fuck off my TV heat with me. I don't want to see him anymore. I have nothing good that I'll ever be able to report on with him. So rather me suffer through it and piss all over it, like I'm sure it'll be much deserved, I'm just going to actively boycott all his material and save us all the breath. I will, however, talk about this MJF promo in the back. Granted, the one-time Renee would have probably been a perfect backstage interview with one of their top heels. Of course, they had that fucking idiot Alex Marvez conducting the interview instead. And that guy is still faker than a tit job every time I see him act or speak on camera. So he recites a bunch of obviously scripted and rehearsed verbiage at MJF, and eventually gets to the question of whether or not he was going to shake Wheeler Yuta's hand after their match last week. And before MJF can answer, Stokely Hathaway walks in from behind, and MJF immediately shuts him down by pointing out the patent AEW trope of guys interrupting backstage interviews all the time. So why they continue to do it when they know it happens constantly and it's annoying as fuck, I don't know. But they're obviously aware of it, which makes the whole thing that much more infuriating. Anyway, MJF basically told Stokely to piss off, told him he's at strike 2 with him, and if he screws up again, he's going to be fired. So again, they put the firm together less than 4 weeks ago. They sort of aligned MJF with the group as whatever they're calling it, his support system or something like that. And now they are already teasing a breakup. Well before we've even really established the group or any of the guys involved in it. And AEW wonders why no one gives a crap about the majority of the people on their roster. So Stokely finally leaves, and MJF starts cutting a promo on William Regal. Says they have a pretty checkered past, and MJF is not afraid to reveal Regal's demons to the public. Whatever that can be insinuating, I don't really know. But then he directs his attention to Yuta, saying that he's not sure about whether or not he was going to shake his hand last week. He's done a lot of self-reflection in the last 7 days, and he learned from a young age that being the nice guy gets him nowhere. Says that he knows people hate him, up to and including most of the boys in the locker room, but Yuta has no clue what it's like to be MJF, realizing he has to wake up every day and be the bad guy. And while most people hate him, up to and including Yuta himself, MJF doesn't like himself either, especially when he walks through that curtain. But that's what it takes to be the best. That is what it takes to be the world champion. Because as many of us all know, MJF is in fact a generational talent. Okay, so remember when I said that the Billy Gunn Swerve match was one of the better things on the show? That was a bold-faced lie. MJF's promo was by far the single highlight of the program. Not that I'm all surprised, because that tends to be the case with about 99.9% of the time MJF is on camera. It was a fucking phenomenal promo. What else is there to say? It's one of those deals where you totally buy into the idea that MJF meant every word he said here. And it's something I think a lot of people can relate to, especially the people that are really hard on themselves and never settle for mediocrity in their life. You know, there are a lot of people that wake up in the morning and hate the person they are, but they also understand that being the nice guy gets them nowhere in life because no one respects them. They're sold a bill of goods for their entire lives of being nice people, but who are nice people at the end of the day? They're people that have no balls, no backbone, and nobody respects them. Just ask Tony Khan if you don't believe me. I mean, I totally identify with what MJF was saying here. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that I hate myself personally. That's kind of a strong statement. But I'm also not the scum of the earth and one of the most hated men in the wrestling world. I'm also not a generational talent. But I'm damn sure a fan of MJF. And I can promise you, the moment they try and turn this guy babyface, his career is over as we know it. And anyone that tries to dispute that, I promise you, it'll come back to bite them in the ass. MJF needs to turn babyface like a fucking alcoholic needs a taste test at a winery. And it's promos like this that continue to facilitate that. So we follow that with his Jon Moxley-Adam Page face-off, 1 week ahead of their world title match in Cincinnati, which I'm just watering at the mouth to see. The suspense is killing me. Couldn't even attempt to make a joke about that. Anyway, Moxley came out and immediately took the mic from Tony, said some words. Somehow he got through this promo without saying something about drinking Adam Page's blood and sucking his venom through a straw or something like that. But he did call out Adam Page, who came out looking like an idiot. At least he left his wife's butterfly jeans at home for the occasion. If I were running this company, I would have fined Page for every attire he's worn on TV that didn't directly involve either a button-down shirt or regular blue jeans. But, well, I will say this about Page in this promo. Whatever substances he was coked up on before coming out to do this, maybe someone ought to have talked him out of it. Well, first off, MJF did not help matters any because there were periods during Page's promo where not only was he coming off so phony and so scripted, but when it got to the point where Page was standing there punching himself in the head like a kid with Tourette's, they panned the camera up to MJF in the skybox, and he's sitting there chomping on popcorn. And at that point, I laughed so hard. This whole thing was so ridiculous. MJF watching from the top of the arena eating popcorn and just basking in the phoniness of the fake cowboy 1 week ahead of a world title match, that one got me. And albeit, I think Moxley was desperately trying to hold back from laughing too because his face was pretty red here. And he had that look where you could tell he was trying not to crack a smile, but like eventually he did. Probably thinking to himself, like, what is this idiot doing right now? And meanwhile, Page is there rubbing his forehead because he legitimately bruised himself with how hard he punched his head. But the real highlight of this thing by far, the moment where Page is going to wrap up his promo and he gives Moxley his word that next week in Cincinnati, he becomes AEW World Champion. And all the while, the crowd all chants in unison. What 3 letters, you ask? MJF. What more is there to say? That right there is everything you need to know about AEW's booking in a nutshell. They wasted the better part of 3 years building up one of their worst AEW World Champions in modern recorded history, only so that when they get to the moment where he gets a single opportunity to win it back, not one person in the crowd chanted his name. They were chanting for MJF. Amazing. Can't make that stuff up, folks. Meanwhile, you'll still have reporters trying to sell you on how much of a money match this is next week between Moxley and Page. And they'll still try to convince you that Adam Page is over and that the people love him and that he was a great world champion. This right here is all the evidence you need. It's really all there is to say about it. Adam Page versus Jon Moxley for the AEW World title in Cincinnati next week on free television. And all the people care about is Maxwell Jacob Friedman becoming the champion, like he damn well should. The real megastar of this program. The real MVP of all elite wrestling. The only personality and or talent on the show worth giving a damn about. I wanted to put FTR on that same pedestal, but, well, they're kind of a lost cause at this point. Then for the Ring of Honor World Championship, we had Chris Jericho defending against Bryan Danielson. What ended up being the main event for me, because it was the final thing that I actually watched on this show. More on that in a little bit. I think I talked about this last week. I've been pretty cold on Danielson for a while now in AEW. I mean, his booking has been absolutely atrocious for a long time. And it's at the point now where I'm starting to think that even he recognizes just how bad things are. Because I watch Danielson wrestle now, and I'm not going to say he's not trying. But is it fair to say that he's sort of just going through the motions? Like, none of his matches are really standing out now. And I remember when he was having really great TV matches almost every week on this show over a year ago. Like, whether he was wrestling Miro or Kingston or Omega, those 2 great matches with Adam Page, the only 2 matches Page has ever had that I would consider good. And now he's wrestling and there's just nothing to it. Like, he's out there doing moves. It's fine. It's not really engaging or captivating. It's just Bryan Danielson having a match. You know, watching this made me realize how much I miss Bryan Danielson as AEW's top heel. Seems like ancient history when that was a thing. That was probably when Danielson was at his peak in AEW. Then the Blackpool Jack-Off Club happened, and it all goes to shit from there. I mean, nothing either guy did here was bad necessarily. For a rubber match, it didn't really have a big fight feel to it. This is probably the coldest of the 3 matches they've had, if I'm being honest, even with the video package they aired beforehand. But like I said before, you know, they were in there exchanging some holds. They were doing some stuff. Nothing was particularly bad, just boring at best. But then we get the sports entertainment garbage at the end. And this thing just totally fell off a cliff at that point. So they do a ref bump with Paul Turner, which is probably one of the better ref bumps AEW's done in a while. At least Turner actually looked like he got bulldozed over in this case. And while he's on the floor selling, Jericho is setting up to use the Ring of Honor belt to clock Danielson with it. And of course, this is supposed to be the point where Daniel Garcia makes the run-in to stop Jericho. And Jericho is standing there with the belt overhead. And he's waiting. And he's waiting. And he's waiting. And he's waiting some more. He's kind of looking over his shoulder, probably wondering to himself, where the fuck is this goddamn idiot? So after about, give or take 8 or 9 months, outruns Garcia to finally pull the belt away from Jericho. And then comes the Russo swerve that everyone and their dead mother could see coming a mile away. Danielson gives Jericho the Busaiku knee. Also, Garcia could clock Danielson with the belt after the fact. And, of course, the thing is totally fucked up because they're in Canada. So instead of people booing Garcia for screwing over Danielson, the people are all chanting for Garcia because he ended up helping out Jericho, the hometown guy. Just a total Mark segment. I mean, really the only good thing I can take away from it was that at least Garcia's going back to being a full-fledged heel again, which is a lot better than trying to run with him as a babyface when no one could possibly care at this point. It's a complete back-assward form of booking because they pretty much run the course with Garcia as a heel now, especially by continuing to align him with the jag-off asshole society, but whatever. You know, I'm ambivalent about anything they do with that faction at this point, much like I'm ambivalent about anything they do with Bryan Danielson. They've beaten the guy into powder to the point where I don't even care if I really see Danielson on my TV ever again for as long as I live. I am convinced at this point that he will continue to be one of AEW's biggest flops when it's all said and done. When I write my book on AEW, Bryan Danielson will have an entire chapter of that book dedicated to him. The complete mismanagement of Bryan Danielson. That'll be the title of the chapter. Might be half the goddamn book at this rate. So at this point, there was about 45 minutes left in the show, give or take commercials. They had 2 advertised matches left to go. There was a women's tag match, which, say no more. I really don't have a lot of time to be watching a bunch of sloppy green girls try and put spots together on a broadcast television program to begin with. And the final match was the Orange Cassidy Pac match for the Mid-Atlantic, almost all the Atlantic, but not quite the entire Atlantic heavyweight title. A match that I swear to God they literally just did like 2 weeks ago on TV, and I skipped over it then. So why on earth they thought I was going to come back and watch it when they booked it a few weeks later in the main event, I have no idea. All I know is that Orange Cassidy won, and I'm sure the remaining 800,000 something people watching at home are all jizzing in their pants over it. And for the kind of people that like that thing, that's the kind of thing those people like. So that was Dynamite. Saved me about 45 minutes of airtime altogether. I can't imagine I was the only one that checked out after that Danielson-Jericho match. Why the hell Tony booked that at the top of the hour instead of the main event, I don't know. Maybe because he realized how much of a ratings kill Daniel Garcia is, so he didn't want to risk it for the biscuit. Although substituting him with Orange Cassidy in the main event is questionable at best. I am actually curious as to what the final number was for Dynamite, especially with that main event segment. I also heard that apparently there were baseball playoffs happening, so I'm sure that'll be people's excuse as to why Dynamite ends up doing a bad number for this week. Not that they booked Orange fucking Cassidy in the main event for their TV show like he's actually a main event guy, or that their central story on TV right now for the better part of the last 4 weeks has all been about Daniel Garcia, the most heavily forced guy on a major wrestling network since Randy Orton circa 2003 or 4. And it didn't work back then either. God. I mean, I could go on if I wanted to, but I really don't have the energy to vent about it. Plus, I have to piece the podcast together anyway in the editorial process, so might as well just put it to bed now while I'm ahead of myself. Dynamite's a total mess right now. MJF is the only thing that I even remotely have interest in watching right now, and until he wins the world title, everything else on this show is going to feel like it's in autopilot mode. Their Full Gear pay-per-view feels like a complete afterthought right now, and without any other major stars like CM Punk around, once again, the guy in the driver's seat right now is MJF. And everything else that happens is just peripheral material. You know, people might not like hearing me say that, but I mean, if you're going to try and tell me that anything topped that MJF promo on this show, pass me whatever crack you're smoking, man. You know, the problem this week is that Max didn't even get his own in-ring segment. All he got was a backstage pre-tape and a cameo appearance in a promo segment for a world title match that he's not even involved with for next week. But Tony Khan's going to win Booker of the Year anyway, so guess it all doesn't matter. Because my opinion means nothing. You know, the marks will continue sucking his cock because that's what they do. Meanwhile, I'll just be here in the background pointing out the flaws, and we'll all continue to look past them as if nothing's wrong. All right, NWA World Championship Wrestling, October 11th, 1986. Another short one for this week. In fact, I think the next few weeks of studio shows are going to be pretty short. Gives me a little more breathing room when it comes to the busy schedule, I guess. And this one started with quite the segment. We begin with Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch showing up, and he has a bunch of gimmicks that I guarantee you he bought at Party City for well under $20. He has on a fake necklace, shades, and to top it all off, a long white wig. Not even a blonde wig, but legit white. And the key here is that he's making fun of Ric Flair, saying he can doll himself up and dress in all the fancy attire he wants to which I said, if this is Dick Murdoch's definition of fancy attire, he needs to up his game a little bit. But he basically says that whether you're a construction worker or a ditch digger or the finest man walking today, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, his words, not mine, it makes no difference to Captain Redneck because he has Rolex watches and suits, and it doesn't mean a damn thing to him. He says he's never run from a fight in his life, and he isn't going to start now with Ric Flair and the rest of the Horsemen. And at this point, he popped something in his mouth. It looked like a granola bar, but it also could have been chew for all I know. But that brought Ric Flair out to confront him, and that is when they cut to the opening graphics, which made me quickly realize, oh, it was a pre-tape. I honestly just thought this was a cold open to start the show. But, it was probably the most memorable thing Dick Murdoch has done on the studio show since he's shown up. The image of Dick Murdoch with a long white wig on. That is an image that'll never leave your head. It'll probably haunt you at night if you think about it too frequently. Anyway, they had a couple news bulletins to cover here at the opening. First, they addressed the ongoing situation with the Paul Jones Army, still hyping the upcoming debut of Ravishing Rick Rude. But they also inform us that Manny Fernandez has officially sold out. Paul Jones offered him the briefcase of money, and the Bull took the money. After saying no one could ever put a price on him. Guess Paul Jones finally got to his head. They also informed us that Robert Gibson has injured ribs, and even though the Rock and Roll Express are the current World Tag Team Champions, Ricky Morton is permitted to find a replacement partner until Gibson is cleared to return. By the way, we never actually found out who that replacement partner was on this show, but throwing it out in the open, I guess. And of course, while they're covering all this, Jim Cornette is, I can't even say walking in the periphery. He's lurking, being very wacky, as per usual, I guess. And, he was just there to do his ring intros for the Midnight Express. And they had a quick squash, wrestled Art Pritz and Paul Garner. Didn't they do this match last week? Maybe Pritz was teaming with someone else, but I could have sworn I saw this exact match on last week's program. Of course, all these job guys are pretty interchangeable anyway, so Lord knows you could ever pick them out of police lineup in most cases. I like Corny's comment to Tony here where he said, "Tony, Kmart called. They said your suit's ready." And that line was funny in and of itself. I was more so just reminded of how old I am, now realizing that Kmart is not even a thing. For you younglings out there, you obviously would not get the joke. There was pretty much nothing else to really note about this, except for the spot where Eaton dragged Pritz over to the booth so Corny could flick him in the nose. We also had Cornette doing a full minute-long tangent on the Road Warriors and Paul Ellering, where I truly believe that Corny actually went a full minute without taking a breath. Midnight's went over with the rocket launcher. Then we had a Dusty promo, and he's got some film he wants to show us all, highlighting a recent house show match with Sam Houston and Buddy Landel, with special guest referee Billy Dundee, as Dusty referred to him as. And the final few moments of this match, we see Houston take out the heels by himself, only to get jumped by, of all people, Bulldog Bob Brown. Talk about a throwback. I wish I had the chance to watch more all-star wrestling tapes from back in the day, especially some of the real classic material from around the early 70s, because Bob Brown was well past his prime by the time this aired. I think he retired only a few years after doing some brief work in Stampede Wrestling. But the whole angle here was showing Dusty run out to save Houston after Bulldog Brown tried to lay the boots to him. And honestly, it really didn't seem to serve much of a purpose historically, as far as I can recollect. And Dust blew right past that bullet point so that he could recognize that it is, in fact, his birthday. October 11th, 1945. Dusty's official birth date. Damn. Can't believe it's been 7 years already, man. And I just can't help but smiling listening to this because you get all the fans singing happy birthday to Dusty, and there's Dusty soaking it all in as only the American dream could. Says he's a child of God and he loves everybody, Daddy. Never forget that. And he promised that Dusty's going to get mean, bad, and ugly on the Horseman. 5 stars. Then we follow that with the Party Poopers, JJ and Tully. And they're here to mock Dusty for cheap-shotting Bulldog Brown like a coward when it was totally uncalled for. And that alone would be hilarious, but it's made even better by Tully standing next to JJ while he's going off on Dusty, and he's just nodding his head in agreement like a total schmuck. They're also still recounting their story of traveling all the way to Kansas City to attack Dusty, continuing to justify that they were only there to shop for clothes. But, well, this is where they showed the rest of the clip with Flair and Murdoch from the opening deal. And Flair told Murdoch that he was there to, and I quote, stretch his country butt. Hopefully not in the literal sense. And as Flair lures Murdoch into the ring for said country butt stretching, of course it's all a setup, so the rest of the Horsemen could come out to jump Murdoch with him. And evidently all the babyfaces clear out from the locker room for the save. But Tully says that the babyfaces are nothing more than a bunch of cheats, because all they do is cheap shot the Horsemen from behind like cowards. And he closes by telling Dusty it may be his birthday, but pretty soon he's got to walk the aisle and face Tully in the ring for the TV title, And by hook or by crook, the Horsemen are going to reclaim that belt. That was pretty much it. By the way, the stuff with JJ and Tully calling out the good guys for cheap-shotting them from behind. Classic heel lines. Then we had a brief Ivan Koloff promo where he restates the Russian mission to take over the United States circa 1986. According to Ivan, the way the Russians gained control of America is by not nuclear war, but apparently by capturing championship belts. That is their plan. They will take over the country by winning leather straps with plates of gold engraved on them. Ain't pro wrestling wacky sometimes. Aside from that, he basically did a long-winded speech about how the Russians are welcoming competition so they can prove that they are the superior athlete. He also had a great deal of trouble getting out the word prestigious. Took him like 3 attempts, but eventually he got it. Brad Armstrong wrestled Randy Barber next. Is this the first Brad Armstrong match we reviewed on the Superstation shows? I know he's been around, but I don't know if we have actually called one of his matches yet. Well, be that as it may. I always liked Brad Armstrong. You know, you've obviously heard some of the stories about him over the years, how he was always a great athlete and a really super gifted guy in the ring, but he never really had the it factor or charisma like Bryan did. Definitely didn't have the crowd reception like Bullet Bob did, that's for sure. You know, I've heard the whole discussion on the idea that he always had the charisma off camera, but he could just never get it to translate in the ring. I don't know how much of that is true or not, but I know for a fact that people loved him. I mean, he obviously had a hell of a work ethic, and it all showed every time I saw him in the ring. You know, his run in Mid-South was probably the best example of big crowd reception, because that dude was over in that territory. You know, here in the studio, it's harder to replicate that crowd reaction. Obviously, the size of the crowd being the problem. You know, but the guy had a great physique. Can't ever forget that. He wasn't a small guy either, so some of the athletic stuff he was able to pull off for having that type of body was almost incredible back in the day. You know, especially for this time in the business. Back before all the 400-pound guys were doing pretty much the same stuff at the same speed. But Brad went over with the Russian leg sweep. Again, not the most exciting thing in the world. You know, Brad Armstrong's always such a difficult subject when wrestling fans bring him up because it's like, I don't know. I think a lot of his career was a big what-if scenario. You know, what if you got a real chance to be a main event level guy? You know, what if you got a run in the WWF when he was in his prime? You know, would Vince have gotten it with him, or would he have just been saddled with another lousy gimmick? It's hard to say. It really is. Ron Garvin did a promo after this. The Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that on last week's show or not. Honestly, he really didn't say that much. Just said he's using the Mid-Atlantic title as a stepping stone to continue his path to the World's Heavyweight title. And all the Ronnie Garvin fans can bet on that happening by the end of 1986. Or Ronnie Garvin fans a thing? I kid. Yeah, don't rake me over the coals for that. Although I can confirm, Ronnie Garvin does not in fact become the World Heavyweight Champion by the end of 86. So he did in fact lie to his fans. Shouldn't do that, Ronnie. That is not a babyface-like thing to do. Then we cut back to the ring for a Tim Horner Bill Tab squash. Horner out-wrestled and out-maneuvered Tab for a few minutes, and then he won with the bridging roll-up. He also exhibited zero facial expressions during this thing. Again, really nothing to add to it. I should point out, in reference to this past week's SmackDown with the Gunther-Sheamus title match, There was a spot in this match where Horner had Tab in an armbar on the mat, and Tab tapped the mat several times. Not a submission call. I'm still kind of astonished people have actually been trained to think that when a guy taps the mat, it automatically equates to a submission. I mean, I guess it's more the visual effect than anything, which is why modern wrestling does it now, but just thought I'd point that out because it's topical. Keeping on the topic of some of the new breeds showing up around this point, Ravishing Rick Rude was in action for the first time on the Superstation. And yes, they in fact put him in there with Lee Peak. That guy's still around. And I had totally forgotten that Rude actually had entrance music in the NWA. Granted, it was the superimposed filtered network version because of copyright issues, but I think they just use Rude's regular WWF theme now that I think about it. And, well, I know this will be shocking for anyone watching at home, but he did not get the name Ravishing Rick Rude for nothing. He was indeed ravishing. Built like a Greek god, chiseled out of stone, whatever cliche you want to use. The dude looked quite fine. He was not someone that resorted to cheat meals during the week. And he decimated this poor Elite Peak, dropping him on the back of his neck with a belly-to-belly throw on the first move of the match. And he continued pounding on the guy and flexing his muscles until finally putting him away with his signature Rude Awakening DDT. How did I not remember this guy first came in with Paul Jones? Out of all the wacky cartoon characters that were part of that Paul Jones army, and then Rick Rude shows up from out of nowhere and aligns himself with Paul. Just a total outcast from everyone else in that group. He was in much better shape than Tijo Khan, I can promise you that. And that was followed with a ravishing promo from Paul Jones alongside Rick Rude. And Paul's out there doing every stumbling, bumbling, fumbling rant you've ever heard, fucking up words left and right. And he eventually gets to the point that guys like Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez are the types of men that money can buy. And Rude's first go on the mic here on the Superstation, it was a knock it out of the park type promo, telling the people at home not to adjust their TV sets when they see Rick Rude on camera because it's his giant abs bulging out in front of them. Says that Paul Jones is offering him a large sum of money to get business done, and he does not care what the mission is. And he did some more flexing while Paul Jones insinuated that Rick Rude would look great with the world's television title around his waist. They also showed footage of the Manny Fernandez turn on Jimmy Valiant, which is a well-done angle. You got Paul showing up with the briefcase of money, offering it to the Bull, and Bull gets down to feel around to make sure the bills are not counterfeit, I assume. And he goes to slam the briefcase shut, and of course the crowd's going nuts because they're thinking Manny's about to stick it to the heels again. But Paul goes to extend the hand, and the Bull shakes Paul's hand. And as Valiant goes to put his hand on Manny's shoulder, Bull turns around and decks handsome Jimmy over the head with the briefcase. All the while, you got Paul Jones, who's talking over the angle in the studio. He's all yucking it up about the situation. So to close things out, Manny comes out to basically tell everyone that he doesn't deal with losers, and he goes where the money's at. And as long as Paul Jones is offering him the dough, the Bull's here to collect. Or something mischievous like that. Then we have the best part of the show. It is Tully Blanchard versus Tony Zane. And right before the bell, JJ is standing in the ring getting in Tony Zane's face. And as God is my witness, J.J. Dillon, all 40-something years of him, or however old he was in 1986, after all the crap he's put his body through in years prior, Tony goes to wind up for a clothesline. And not only does JJ duck it, but he gives Tony Zane, of all people, an atomic drop. And he actually got the big tub of goo up. I rewound this and watched it like 8 times in a row. It was the best thing I've ever seen. I honestly could not believe that they actually did an angle on the Superstation where broken down J.J. Dillon gave Tony Zane an atomic drop. Then, of course, Tully picked the bones and won with a slingshot suplex. That was followed with a quick Brad Armstrong and Tim Horner promo that I wrote virtually nothing down about. Horner's promo was awful. He stuttered over himself and looked extremely uncomfortable just standing there. And Brad informed everyone that he and Horner had a run as the National Tag Team Champions, and he is in Crockett Promotions to carry the legacy of the Armstrong family. Oh, and did I mention Tim Horner looked like he was about to shit his pants the entire time? Not trying to give him a hard time or anything, just pointing out the obvious. Then we close with Manny Fernandez beating Kent Glover, with David Crockett calling him every cruel name in the book, including a turncoat. And you know David Crockett is serious when he's dropping terms like turncoat on guys that just turned heel. But the main talking point here came out of the angle at the end, where Ronnie Garvin came out to try and confront the Bull, attempting to get answers as to what the hell was going on with him. And that went about as well as he figured it would. Rick Rude came in and decked Garvin from behind with a clubbing blow, and Bull and Rude started laying out Garvin on the floor. That was it. Turncoat. Couldn't get over that line. I always love pissed off David Crockett. He's the best. And that was pretty much the extent of that main event angle. Again, there really wasn't a whole lot to take away from the show since it was so short. The one thing that is definitely noticeable are all the new guys that are showing up, almost all at once too. It kind of shows you a different element of roster rotation and how that all worked back in the day. But we got some interesting storylines brewing. You know, once again, the Magnum TA tragedy is coming up relatively soon, so we'll probably be covering that in at least a couple weeks. But, you know, that situation hits from almost out of nowhere, too. It'd be very interesting to see how they cover it on the Superstation, because I think I talked about it last week. I have no memory of how that covered, or they covered any of that stuff. So, we will find out. But in the meantime, why don't we shift gears and talk about some world-class wrestling? A very interesting program this week, if for anything, because it was time to learn who gorgeous Jimmy Garvin was bringing in as Sunshine's personal assistant. And, well, they certainly didn't disappoint in that payoff. We did start the show with another airing of a previously taped bout, going back to the August 12th taping at the Sportatorium. They replayed the Kerry Von Erich Buddy Roberts match, and if it had not been for seeing Buddy with the patented helmet on again, I probably would not have been able to figure that out. They also threw up a graphic specifying it was taped on the 13th of August. But this is the match people sent in a boatload of fan mail to see again, and watching it back, I think I see why. This was the famous TV match where Kerry was going right after Buddy's helmet from the opening bell and trying to rip the wig off. And of course, they centered the entire match around that story, ending with Kerry managing to rip the helmet off, but not being able to obtain the wig. And obviously, we've reviewed and talked about that match, so we don't really need to go in full detail about it again. All you really need to remember about it is that the Dallas faithful were passionately chanting for Kerry to get the wig. Unfortunately, Buddy managed to escape. This is also the match where, after Kerry won, Michael Hayes had run out with the leather strap and started whipping Kerry with it until he was able to run them both off. And I think that set up the strap match with Kerry and Michael for probably the next week, I assume. But then we got the segment. This was... well, it was a lot of things. It was mesmerizing, for one, because it's pretty much safe to assume that when Jimmy Garvin is on camera with Sunshine, I think you know where my eyeballs are going to be directed at. However, and even though she wasn't outright mentioned here by name, yes, we did get the on-screen debut of Precious, aka Jimmy Garvin's wife. And it is easy to forget this, but Sunshine, even though her on-screen character was working as Garvin's valet, she was actually Garvin's real-life cousin, because they had both come in together in the Florida region in '82, right before their debut in World Class. But it was not until '83 where we actually were introduced to Precious on camera for the first time. And they've been building up this story for a while with the three of them. And they pretty much laid out the deal here. Garvin talked about how Sunshine had been working so hard as his valet for a long time. And because Garvin is a kind, thoughtful man, he wanted to give Sunshine a little bit of assistance so that she didn't have to strain herself trying to carry a heavy workload all the time. You know, because it is a great deal of business doing work with Jimmy Garvin. So, seems about right to me. And they kind of played around with this and had some fun with it. You got Mercer asking Sunshine what exactly Precious's role is going to be as her assistant. And Sunshine's firing off a bunch of house chores, basically saying that she's going to be her maid without outright using the term. And of course, Bill Mercer trying to stir the pot at the end here by asking how close Precious is going to get to Gorgeous Jimmy in this whole relationship. You know, because we all love that drama. And Sunshine, of course, did not take too kindly to Mercer trying to assert that Precious is going to get close, that she was going to come between Sunshine and Garvin's relationship on camera. Oh, the art of foreshadowing. How sweet it is. So yeah, this segment was pretty damn great. Anything on the show with Garvin and Sunshine is always going to be great. Who am I kidding? Plus, anytime Sunshine is on camera, period, it's always a pleasure. But we'll stay posted with this little trio in the weeks to come because I suspect things are going to go sideways very quickly. Call me skeptical, but I kind of know how these angles work in pro wrestling. Sunshine's going to be experiencing some competition anxiety pretty soon. Then we followed with an unintentional bit of comedy. It's Kamala wrestling a squash against Art Cruz, who I believe also worked in the Mid-South territory as a job guy for a period of time. But the funny thing here is that the match is technically in progress as they come back from break, and while Kamala is just pounding away on this poor fella, Mark Lorenz is just nonchalantly doing ring intros. Never mind that there's a giant 330-pound wild man ripping a dude apart in the ring. Just another day at the office for Mark Lorenz introducing the wrestlers. But Kamala won with a splash in about a minute. And while he teased giving Cruz a post-match splash from the top rope, Skandar Akbar and Friday were able to talk him down. I believe Mercer also mentioned something about a bounty that Akbar has put out for anyone that can successfully body slam Kamala on TV. It's funny because they use the word bounty to make it seem like Akbar is in opposition to Kamala, but it's more so like saying it's a reward. So I guess we'll see if there are any takers in the weeks to come. Who's going to be able to slam the Ugandan warrior? I can assure you one thing. It will not be Lex Luger. It will also more than likely not be taking place on the USS Intrepid. That's a Raw reference in case anyone hasn't been following the Retro Raw reports. We had Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts going up against Chris Adams and Johnny Mantel. Pretty much your prototypical world-class tag match that we've all come to expect. Babyface Flaherty, Heels cut off Adams and work him over for a period of time, keeping him isolated in the heel corner for a while. Mantel finally got the hot tag at the end. Michael Hayes took every Michael Hayes bump you've ever seen. Very cartoony. They, of course, do the role reversal eventually where the heels cut off Mantel so Adams can get the hot tag at the end. There were a couple things that Mercer talked about here in terms of ongoing storylines. Aside from covering the ongoing Jimmy Garvin Sunshine story, he also mentioned that Dallas fans have been apparently clamoring to see the girls wrestle, to which I said, they have? I'll try and brace myself ahead of time. At least he let us know that we will soon see the Junkyard Dog on Dallas TV. I think 83 was shortly before Dog started gaining the reputation of the junk food dog. Because, well, for anyone that needs historical reference, go back and watch some of those Mid-South shows right before the Dog left the territory and went to the WWF in the summer of 84. He was packing on some extra weight. It's for damn sure. Anyway, getting back to the match real briefly. Of course, they do the big four-way spot at the end where everything is pandemonium for a minute or two. He'll try to double-team Adams, and I don't really know what happened at the end here, but it looked like there was some miscommunication on whether or not Adams was supposed to gain the upper hand after ducking a clothesline off the ropes. What happens is, Hayes starts fighting Mantel on his knees, and then Adams hits Roberts with a super kick for the 3. Kind of clunky. But aside from that, people obviously went crazy for the finish. And of course, Buddy's excuse right before they cut the break. He goes to Hayes and gives the pulling of the tights sign. Gotta love when the heels resort to douchebaggery. Speaking of said douchebaggery, the main event saw Jimmy Garvin defending the American Heavyweight title against David Von Erich. But before we get that, Chris Adams came into the ring, and he laid out the challenge to Garvin to put up the American Heavyweight title against him again, drawing good attention to detail here with Mercer mentioning how last time Adams and Garvin met on TV, Garvin had barely escaped with the belt after a 10-minute time limit draw, and that was right after he said that he would defend the belt every week on TV, because that is how much of a fighting champion he was. So, of course, first title defense, he narrowly escapes with the title, and now the weekly title defenses are off the table. Classic. Unfortunately, this little pre-match promo was kind of a spoiler for how the finish was going to go down. The match pretty much went as you would expect it would go. David took about 80% of the match. Garvin bumped and sold forever. Did every stalling and heat tactic in the book to piss off the Dallas crowd. Garvin finally got the upper hand while Sunshine took Bronco Lubick in the corner so Garvin could grab David by the hair. It really is kind of amazing to think just how actual heat worked back in the day in the territories when the heels were actual heels that the people legitimately despised. Like, the spots where Garvin would cower in the corner and try to cover up, God, that people went ballistic over that shit. And I don't mean like ballistic in the positive sense. I mean like a heated frenzy. Like, they absolutely hated the idea that Jimmy Garvin would refuse to wrestle David. And they had to resort to cowering in fear in the corner. You're never going to see heat like that again in the business. So, the finish ended up seeing Devastation Inc. come down, and Kamala got in the ring and started attacking David for the blatant DQ. And this proved to fail in the end, as David ended up firing back on Kamala and locking in the claw on him. And after Kamala manages to escape out of the ring, Akbar tries to send Kamala back in the ring to fight David. However, this time, Kamala backs down. Never before seen, but the unstoppable Ugandan warrior finally met his maker. And now we've got a big showdown to look forward to with these guys in the coming weeks. As for next week's show, pretty big match scheduled between the Iceman King Parsons and Harley Race for the NWA World Heavyweight title. Definitely looking forward to that match. Overall, show was a lot of fun. Some good wrestling, some great plot development in the key areas. And now we just patiently await the inevitable with Sunshine and Jim Garvin. I cannot wait. So I think that'll do it for this one. Thanks for stopping in for the podcast this week. We will be back this coming Monday for the post-Extreme Rules SmackDown report. Not really sure what to expect after everything that went down on Saturday, but as I noted in the pay-per-view review, the Bray Wyatt thing has me really intrigued right now. I don't know if he's going to be a Raw guy or a SmackDown guy exclusively, but he definitely has the most buzz out of everything that went down on that show. And I'd probably say he has the most buzz out of anything going on in the product right now. The Saudi Arabia show, I think I already talked about how I probably was not going to be watching that show just because I really don't see anything on that show worth discussing. And, that sadly includes the Roman Reigns-Logan Paul title match. I've kind of talked about it on the SmackDown shows. The character dynamics are all out of whack with that program. And I think as of now, it's the only thing they actually have officially booked for the card. So unless they've got a few other things on that show that are worth my time checking out, I just don't really see the point in talking about it. The Crown Jewel shows are usually shows where they try to put in a little more effort when it comes to the top level feuds, but I don't know, a lot of the time I've found the shows to just be really weird viewing experiences. But we'll stay posted with it. Maybe they'll hook me with something. I'm interested to see if they actually book Bray for that show in some capacity. He's going to be a really hard character to manage, and it's really important that they get it right with him this go around. Because if they slip up with him in the slightest when it comes to creative direction, I think that might be curtains for Bray's in-ring career. He's been a victim of some horrible booking in his first run with the company, even dating all the way back to when they first fucked him up by having him job out to John Cena at WrestleMania. That kind of spelled the beginning for the end of Bray's career as far as I was concerned, and to this day, I don't think he ever recovered after that initial run. And even looking back at all the stuff they did with him in Extreme Rules, he got a big crowd reaction when he came out, but I'm still skeptical about it. However, I'm willing to keep an open mind. But until Monday, thanks for watching all. Take care. Peace.